Hello, it's Stuart Fensterheim, the Couples Expert, here at the Couples Expert Podcast. Welcome once again to another edition of my podcast. This is such a wonderful day here in Scottsdale. It's about 80 degrees, and I know that there's a number of places in the country that weather is awful today. I was talking to a friend of mine, Lisa, who lives in Georgia, and they're getting tremendous storms today. She lost power, and it's really horrible. Well, today here, it's a gorgeous blue sky, and we're here talking about sex. What's better than that? I want to talk a little bit about my guest today, which is Dr. Charlie Glickman. Charlie is a guy who I met at a workshop on somatic healing when it comes to sexuality. He was the instructor, and it was a workshop for therapists on really helping their clients deal with some of the physical things that come up somatic when it comes to sexuality and how to really have a wonderful sexual relationship with your partner. And it was very experiential, which is fun for me because the work I do with couples in my office is truly an experiential one. It's not about words, and it's about the action in changing the interpretation that couples have about their partners. So when I saw Dr. Glickman and a little bit about how he worked, it really sent a positive note for me. So I went up there at our break and I asked him if he would come on to the podcast, not knowing if he would have any interest, and he did. So I'm really thrilled that he agreed to join us. So let me tell you a little bit more about him. Dr. Charlie Glickman is a sex and relationship coach. He's an educator, and his focus is on sexological body work. And he speaks in all different international places. We're fortunate that he's agreed to speak here as a guest on the show. He's worked in the field for about 25 years, and his focus is really on sexuality and shame, sex positive, gay lesbian issues, masculinity and gender, and really talking about eroticism. And I'm hoping that today, when we talk about long distance relationships, I don't want to just talk generally. I want to get really down to the really heart of the issue and have Charlie really help us understand what some of the things we can do to keep the sex life alive when you have a relationship in which you are long distance. Charlie is also a co-author, and it's an incredible book on the ultimate guide to prostate pleasure, erotic exploration for men and their partners. You can find out more about him at his website, which is charlieglickman.com, or on Twitter. He also has a Facebook page. Well, we'll get to know him more intimately here in just a moment, because I really want to welcome you, Charlie, to the show. And thank you for coming on this Couples Expert Podcast.
Thank you, Stuart. It's a pleasure to be here today.
You know, I think the topic we're about to engage in the conversation is a really important one, because I have so many people that come to my office and really they have these relationships, and these are for folks that one partner or maybe even both partners travel for a living. And how do you keep your sexual relationship alive when you're hundreds or thousands of miles away? So I'm excited to be able to really talk about specific things that people can do to really keep their emotional and physical relationships strong, even if there's a distance.
You're right. This is something that shows up for a lot of people. And I think not just couples where one person travels a lot for work, but even sometimes people where we're on opposite work schedules. Maybe I work days and you work swing shift. Right? So we might be living in the same house, but not getting to see each other very often. So I think a lot of the tools work across the board with this.
And I think we have to start with the emotional piece, don't we?
Absolutely. This is one of the things that couples often get stuck in, is forgetting that a happy, thriving sex life rests on a foundation of a solid, resilient emotional connection. And that does get tricky when you're long distance. It's a little bit easier for people who like to talk, who are good with their words, because that means that you can have a phone call or a Skype call. I actually think that verbal conversations in many ways work much better than email or texting because you lose so much of the emotional nuance in texting. So text is great for sharing information, but when it comes to sharing emotions, you really need to hear somebody's voice.
Plus, the misunderstanding that happens with text is sort of very interesting because I can't tell you how many couples talk to me about the fights that have been created because of a nuance in a text that got misunderstood.
It's so difficult. It really is. And uh, when things are going well, text is great because you can hear your partner's voice in the back of your head and you can trust that. But when things are feeling a little tender or maybe a little fragile, it may feel like it's more work to find time for a phone call. But in the long run, it is so much less work to do that.
So really what we're defining here, actually, I like this much better than what I originally had thought. Long distance relationships, because if we can include the emotional connection here, long distance is when you don't see your partner for long periods of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And let's define it as that.
Yeah. And this is something I often tell couples where maybe one partner is going back to school, right? When one partner is going to school, so's the other one. And in a way, that can become a long distance relationship because maybe you don't see each other for 3 or 4 days at a time because of school schedules. So I like the way that you just reframed that. I think I'm going to play with that myself.
So let's start with some tips, perhaps. And I think we should start with the emotional piece and the emotional connection, how to maintain that emotional presence, the emotional where both people feel important to one another when there is a fair amount of time and you're not seeing each other.
Well, I think one of the places where I send quite a few folks is to the book, The Five Love Languages. I'm sure you're familiar with that,
Yep.
Stuart. What I like about it is it helps people identify which language, which mode of communication really speaks to them. The five love languages: words of affirmation, physical touch, quality time, gifts, and acts of service. And I think it's good to acknowledge that different love languages have different levels of complexity in a long distance relationship. If your language is words of affirmation, text messages saying, "Hey, good job on that project," or a quick phone call or a voicemail, those are all words, and that adapts very easily. If your love language is quality time, obviously that's going to be more difficult when you're in a long distance relationship. But you could do things like, I'm on my phone on my headset, you're on your phone on your headset, and we're both going for a walk in the park. We're 500 or 2,000 miles apart, but we're doing the same thing at the same time. I travel quite a bit for work myself. And one night, just for fun, my partner and I watched the same movie on Netflix talking on the phone. I was in a hotel in Chicago. She was home in Seattle. But it felt like we were sitting on the couch together watching the movie because we were talking to each other in the same way.
And I think that's a really good example of that. Another situation that I've talked with a lot of families about who have young children is setting up a tripod next to you when you're watching your child's game. And you literally having a conversation as if the partner is right there. So many people forget with technology now the advantages of that, and I'm sure we're going to talk some about that when we get to the physical touch piece, is the advantage of having your partner on FaceTime or some other kind of video chat, and they can be literally with you right at the moment that you're experiencing it.
Absolutely. The one sort of hurdle or challenge to overcome is if you're looking at the screen, it can be very easy to just pop over and check your email or look something up on Amazon because you meant to buy it. The important thing here is that you're bringing your presence.
Right. And that's both literally your presence, not doing other things.
Exactly. And that takes practice because Facebook notification, email, like all of this is distracting on the screen. So I actually recommend quitting out of all the other applications so that you're not tempted.
Oh, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. I do think, too, maintaining the emotional connection, it's easy in a long distance relationship, especially when there's a time zone difference, to get out of sync. And so the question that I always want to ask is, how's your heart doing today? Yeah, because if I ask you, how are you doing? A lot of the time, the answer is going to be, oh, I went grocery shopping. I picked up the dry cleaning. The dog needs to go to the vet. But when the goal is the emotional connection, focus on that. So, how's your heart doing? What was that like for you today? Oh, that sounds like it was a really challenging day when your boss yelled at you. You have to do a little bit more effort because you're not there in the flesh. And that can be tricky when there's a time difference of more than a couple of hours, but it's worth the effort.
And I think the other piece is tricky is, and I think you and I deal with a lot of men because we happen to be men. They tend to come to us, is helping men really verbalize in a specific way how they are feeling.
That's such a challenging piece for lots of folks. And you're right, especially men. And I just found out about, I'm going to send you the link right now, Stuart. I wrote a blog post about a product that I recently found. It's a deck of 150 cards. Each of them has a different feeling on it. And the way you use it is you go through the deck one card at a time, and you pull out all of the ones that are resonant with what you're feeling in that moment. And you can do all kinds of things like look at how the cards all fit together, maybe group them by category. But you can also take a photograph of the cards and text them to your partner. And then they can see, oh, you're feeling stressed out and lonely, but also a little bit excited. And it lets you share the nuances of your emotional landscape more easily because you have them on these physical cards. I think it's a fabulous way to tune in.
It's a great tool.
Yeah, it's great.
There's a bunch of them out there now. And I think more and more people are doing that. And I'm finding more and more women equally are having the same challenge, which is an interesting sort of twist that I'm finding a lot of women now having equally difficult times putting their feelings to words. So any tool that we have to help people do that. But the thing that's dangerous, I think, for a lot of people is how they perceive it.
Absolutely.
Because it's so funny, people come to us asking for help with doing that, and then we help one partner express how they feel, and the other partner turns to the partner, and you know what's coming, right?
Yeah.
And they come and says, wow, you only said that because the therapist gave the words to you. Well, yeah.
Yeah. For now.
Right? For now.
Yeah. The therapist is there sort of like training wheels.
Right.
They're going to come off eventually.
Right. And that's what people have to understand is that it doesn't diminish it because whether I or you or a deck of cards help someone identify the feelings, it doesn't make it less valuable.
It's true. And being able to identify your feelings is a skill we have to learn. So if it helps at first to have something like this, that's great. It's probably not going to be necessary forever. So all of that is the emotional landscape, and that does take practice. You have to put more effort into maintaining the emotional connection at a distance. But it's well worth it because that's what makes the sexual connection flow.
Right. So that's a good lead in to where we want to go here so we're working on the love language, and obviously the physical touch is the one that's going to be one of the biggest challenges.
Yes. And people do get creative with things like that. I've talked with folks where the partner who is traveling out of town will wear the same shirt to sleep in for a couple of nights so that it carries their scent. I've talked with couples where one of them gave the other, a teddy bear to cuddle with at night so that it feels like them. Physical touch is definitely the most challenging, but I think one way that people can navigate that is actually through video or phone sex, because you can be together, and even though you're not physically in touch with each other, it can create, many of the same feelings.
So how do you go, though, and this is sort of gets tricky, I think. How do you go from someone that may have religious or cultural issues with touch through video or video chatting, and then do you touch yourself? How do you touch your partner? How do you make it to where it really feels sexual? And it gets complicated.
It can. I think one way to reframe that is we're having sex together, even though we're not in the same place, right? Because, for people who have concerns about masturbation or concerns about porn or whatever it might be, I think focusing on the fact that this is the two of you together is what reframes that, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a paradigm shift, I think, for some folks.
It can be. I mean, it really asks you to reconsider how you define sex. Is sex the act of intercourse, or is it the act of sharing an erotic experience with somebody?
Or as I like to talk about it, it's an expansion of your playfulness.
Yes.
So if we look at it as what we're doing is we're just playing with each other, and I don't mean necessarily in a sexual way, but we're having joyful, playful experiences, and one of them happens to be video sex, that's just one element of our relationship. That doesn't define the relationship.
Exactly. Any more than enjoying Chinese food defines the relationship. It's just one piece of the puzzle. So I like the way that you phrase that.
So let's talk about things that you may be aware of that can be helpful tools in that. You talk about phone sex, you talk about video sex. Are there other things that you're aware of that may be helpful for people to keep their erotic life as well as their sexual life alive?
Sure. I'm a big fan of sexting for that. So text messages that have an erotic component. And it could be anything from, I love the way that your hair smells, right behind your ear, right? To, I'm imagining what you look like walking down the hallway naked. Right? You could have it anywhere along that spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's two main components, and different people have their preferences around these. The romantic component, that's about the heart connection, right? It's, oh, I love the way it feels when we're together. And then there's the passion component, which is about the physical. You have the most amazing legs, or that photo you sent me in your suit on your way to your meeting was so sexy. So there's the emotional component and the physical component. And with sexting, you can bring both of them in. For some people, it can be really edgy to use some of these words, but I think it's really good practice. And one way that you can play with it is to take the words that you would say if you were in person and just put them on the screen. Type them into your phone.
I think we don't want to talk about this without also talking about permission. And you and I met, as I said in my introduction, at a workshop that you were doing. And I recall one of the exercises that we did had to do with getting permission to do something.
Yes.
And I think if you don't have the dialogue ahead of time and not really talk this out before you're at that distance, when you are together, and start talking about permission and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, can you say no? Is no something that you do? and some of the other things that we talked about, I think are important pieces here.
Sure. No, you're absolutely right. Putting something out there at the beginning, hey, I'm feeling sexy. Are you in the mood for a chat? Do you have time this evening for a sexy phone call? Right. And that's not just about respecting each other's boundaries, but also the timing. Like maybe I have a business meeting in the evening and that's not the time for my phone to be blowing up with sexy pictures.
Right. Or the time for me to tell you how it feels when you touch me here or there, or what I like doing to you.
Exactly. Exactly. Might not be the right time for it.
It might be the right time for it too.
Yeah.
Depending on the meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
How boring it is.
Exactly. So you're absolutely right. Start with making sure that the desire and consent is there. Think about whether you want to focus or describe the physical sensations or the emotional sensations that are there. If you have trouble finding your words, one suggestion I have is so you have to be a little careful looking for images on the internet because it's the internet and
Right.
what has been seen cannot be unseen. Actually, there's a wonderful Tumblr page by Elle Chase. It's Lady Cheeky is her Tumblr name, and she posts some wonderful pictures and images and GIFs. Those little short video clips. Some of them are very sweet, some of them are very romantic, and you can scroll through them, save the ones that really speak to you to your computer. And then when you want to send something to your partner, you just copy it into your chat message and maybe include a little note like the look in her eyes as he's kissing the back of her neck is exactly what I love seeing in your eyes. So rather than just sending somebody a sexy picture,
Right.
include a little note about why that is something that really resonated for you. And that's important because people sometimes misunderstand, right? They might think that what's turning you on is the lingerie or the pose or the sex act,
Right.
or their facial expressions.
And I think we have to talk about some caution about when we talk about what we send across the internet, not only what goes online stays online, but, there's some legal issues that we have to sort of talk a little bit about, that it may not be the wisest decision to send a picture of your genitals.
I agree. I think people, of course, have to make their own decisions about whether they want to send a photo of themselves. Of course, we hear the stories about people's phones getting hacked, or sometimes if a couple breaks up, one person will post those photos online. We don't like to think about those happening. But one of the advantages of using a picture from Tumblr is it's not you.
Right.
And so it creates a little extra buffer. Just be sure not to send it to any device that somebody uses for work, because anything on a work computer becomes the company's purview and people lose their jobs over that.
Right. Are there other websites that you would recommend for people? Let's say people who want to sort of get involved with this, have never done it before, and don't know really where to begin in terms of getting more erotic. Or there are a number of websites I know now, particularly ones that focus on sexual massage and sexual areas like that.
Well, I really like Tumblr. And I just sent you, Stuart, I sent you the link to Lady Cheeky's Tumblr page.
Okay, terrific. I'll post that on my show notes.
Yeah, and that's a great place to start. And something that's nice about it is when you see a picture or a little video that you really like, it'll almost always say underneath where it came from. And so you click on that link and you get somebody else's. And so you can explore until you find the people who are posting the things that really work for you.
That's a great beginning. It sounds like it.
Yeah, it's a fabulous beginning. And like I said, a little note explaining why this picture is sexy to you is a really good place to go. For people who are more audio rather than video, I actually had one client, what she shared with me is she and her husband liked erotic audiobooks. But so they decided to make their own, and she went to the store and bought a book of erotic short stories and then recorded herself reading the stories that she really liked out loud. Just recorded them on her phone, emailed it to her husband, and now he got the best of both worlds because he got this very sexy story, but it was in her voice, not just some random voiceover actor.
Right. That sounds like a great idea.
Does that sound fun? And it gave her the confidence in sexy talk. She didn't have to make it up. She was just using somebody else's words. So I'm a big fan of making this as easy as possible.
What are your thoughts in terms of like role playing?
I think it's a great way to do it. So when I think of role play, I don't think of it in terms of acting. I think of it as bringing out a part of our psyche that we don't usually let out to play. The creative part. So, for example, maybe you are very busy all day at work, making big decisions, being in charge. And so for you, the role play might be a more following directions. You're submissive, yeah, and because you're taking a break. And I think the same thing can happen here. The trick, I think, with role play is to make it co-creative. So I share a couple of sentences, or maybe like 3 or 4 sentences, and then you do, and then I do, and then you do. So it's more like volleying a tennis ball back and forth. When the role play is coming too much from one direction, it stops being about the two of you and starts focusing on just one person. And sometimes that doesn't work.
And that's not always fun for people because they want to have a say in what's happening too.
Exactly, exactly. And that also means that when your partner shares their contribution, take that and work with it. So, for example, if I say to my partner, so I'm going to take you out to a bar and you're dressed all sexy because I love the way that other men look at you, but you're here just for me tonight. And then my partner says, "Oh, yeah, I love wearing that little black cocktail dress because it feels so sexy to me." I then want to turn around and say, "Oh, yeah, that cocktail dress that barely covers your body." Right? I want to take what she said as my launching pad.
It reminds me of the kids' game, complete the sentence, or I can't remember what it was we used to play.
Yeah, Mad Libs.
Yeah, like Mad Libs kind of thing.
Exactly. So you want to use your partner's words as the foundation, and then you're going back and forth. That also works well for video sex because talking to each other during video sex adds a whole extra dimension to it.
Define for the listeners exactly what you mean when you say video sex.
Sure. So each partner is on their webcam or they've got their phone propped up so that it's facing them. And it's or one version of it, probably the most common, is each partner is self-pleasuring while engaging with each other. So it might be fantasy talk. It might be, talking to each other about, "Oh, you look so sexy when you're using your vibrator like that. I wish I was there. I can almost smell how turned on you are." So you can make it a fantasy, or you can make it sort of a verbal interaction about what's happening. And for some people, video sex might be nonverbal, but you simply like watching each other in those moments of self pleasure.
So it can be interactive, but it also can be one's an observer and one's the active partner.
Exactly. And with video sex, for some people, they want to watch, whatever their partner is doing to their genitals, whether using a vibrator or hands. But what a lot of people want to see is their partner's face.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be able to
See the pleasure in the face.
yeah, and so that's another thing that you kind of have to play with is where's the camera, what's it pointing at?
The other thing that is very interesting about this conversation has to do with, and this is sort of changing the subject a little bit, how many couples really don't understand what their partner needs physically to be stimulated. And
Oh,
it is an
absolutely.
incredible opportunity to really teach your partner how, when you're together, what you need or want or what's important in terms of your body that will turn you on more than what they may be doing.
You're right. And it's one of the things that sex coaches and therapists often recommend is watching your partner pleasure themselves gives you incredibly useful information about their sexual response, about their desires, about how they like to be touched. And a lot of people I've spoken with have shared with me how surprised they were. They thought that their partner liked soft touch, and it turns out that sometimes they want something more intense,
Mm-hmm.
or vice versa.
Right.
So there's something really liberating about watching your partner pleasure themselves.
And that's if, obviously, we have to talk about there are some people that are uncomfortable with that whole concept as well.
It's true. There's a lot of reasons why people have difficulty or concerns with that. Sometimes it's because of phobias or shame around masturbation. Sometimes it's about not feeling like they can own their own pleasure and really show it. Sometimes it's because people feel like, masturbation is second best. And if you have a partner, you shouldn't need to.
Right. And I think this is a place that's such an important discussion regarding if your partner is not physically present, is it acceptable in a relationship to masturbate and use other forms of stimulation like pornography or erotic literature?
Yeah.
And every couple is going to have, this very complicated question because we have religion and we have all sorts of different reasons that sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's not okay for folks. Again, this is the place where you have to have the dialogue.
You're absolutely right. And maybe on the flip side, we know with sexual response, just like any other part of our body, the less you use it, the less active it becomes.
Right.
So there's a way in which you could even reframe solo sex as keeping yourself in shape for when your partner comes home.
I like the term solo sex as opposed to masturbation. For a lot of folks, that might be somewhat allow them to see it in that way, that it's not you necessarily self-pleasuring, although it is, obviously, but that the two of you are engaging in solo sex.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds manipulative a little bit, but if that works, because I do believe, and I think there's enough research out there, and I'd like your take on this, that those people, folks that do engage in masturbatory behaviors, tend to have more satisfying sex lives.
It's certainly true for many, many folks, both because it gives you an opportunity to keep your sort of your sexual system in shape,
Right.
and because it gives you valuable information about your desires and your needs. Plus, the more you can take ownership of your own sexual response and satisfaction, the less pressure there is on the relationship when sex isn't available because of travel, because of health issues, because of kids. It becomes much less about what you have to do for me. Rather, I can do for myself and take some of the pressure off of you.
Right. And another opportunity to talk about sexual desire.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a piece here too. One of the ways that you can explore or that you can use solo sex is to explore your fantasies.
Mm-hmm.
Because many of us have all kinds of fantasies that show up when we're feeling turned on. And there's actually three layers of questions that I think are worth considering. The top layer is, what is the story of the fantasy? That's as far as most people usually get.
Mm-hmm.
But once you have the story, the second question is, what are the elements to that fantasy that make it hot? Or another way you could say it is, what are the pieces that if you take them out, the fantasy isn't exciting anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And then once you've identified that, you can get down to the third question, which is, how do those elements make you feel? Because when we fantasize or when we have sex with a partner, it's the feeling that we're looking for. And if we're focusing on the story, we might not get to the feeling.
So what we're really talking about is words equal story, emotional component about the words is the underlying.
And that's the important part.
And that's the part that people forget about.
Exactly.
Like if I have a fantasy of having sex with two women, for example, that's the story. I want to have sex with two people of the female gender.
Right.
Now, why do I want to have sex with the two people together? That would be the emotional content underneath it.
Right.
It might be fun to feel that people are that turned on by me, or it could be that I want all these different hands on my body.
Right. It could be, I want all the attention.
The attention, right.
Or it could be, I would really love to watch my girlfriend having sex with another woman.
Which then would open up a different dialogue.
Right, exactly. So this is why we need to talk about how we want to feel, not just what are the events that we want to have happen. So to keep running with this example, if my fantasy of a threesome is because I want to be the center of attention, that creates a very different scenario than a fantasy where I want to get to watch the two of you have sex because I really enjoy seeing you in your pleasure.
And I would think for a lot of people, they may very well be incredibly surprised with the answer.
Exactly. And so the way that you find the surprising answer is you focus on the pieces that if they don't happen, the fantasy falls apart. So in the first version of this threesome fantasy, if you're not both paying attention to me, the fantasy falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Another way that you can approach that is, what are the things that run through your head at the moment of orgasm? Maybe the better way to say it is, when you're close to orgasm, but you can't quite get over the top.
Right.
What's the detail that gets you over the top?
Right. And I think for most couples, and I guess I can only speak for myself here a bit, it's really that my partner desires me. I think that piece for a lot of people is the thing that brings them over the top. It's about being wanted and being desired. And the one discussion I've had with a lot of people lately is about, if you're thinking too much, your body's not going to respond.
It's true. It's true. There's that. It's
letting go is about, orgasm is about letting go.
Yeah. And if you get too stuck in your brain,
right,
it pulls all of your erotic energy up there. But the way that I think this can play out for long distance, when people are having video sex or phone sex, is if you can share with your partner how you want to feel and what are the little details that make the fantasy work for you, that makes it much easier for them to know what to say.
Which goes to the discussion we had earlier, which is finding the words.
Exactly. It takes practice. It definitely takes practice to find the words, especially if you feel embarrassed about it. And so one way that you can overcome the embarrassment is sometime when you're by yourself, maybe you're driving in the car, who knows, just practice saying the words over and over again. So for example, if you have difficulty saying the word penis or cock or dick or whatever the word is that you want to use, when you're by yourself, just say it over and over again. Penis, 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 cock, cock, and it's a way of diffusing the charge.
It also will help you deal with the rush hour traffic a whole lot
It's so
better.
much fun. It's
I
so
agree.
much fun.
No, it's a great thing. And, I used to do acting, and that's where I memorized most of my lines, is sitting there in traffic, bumper to bumper, on my way to work. And I was living in LA. And basically, it was a great opportunity.
So you had lots of traffic.
That's right. And I think that the more comfortable you get just saying the words when you're trying to have the dialogue with your partner, it just happens so much easier. So it's a great suggestion.
Thank you. Yeah, I even talked to one guy once. He bought an audio recording, like an audio book of erotic stories, and he would listen to them in the car. And when he heard something that sounded extra sexy, he would just practice saying that phrase.
Mm-hmm.
He'd pause the playback and say the words a few times just to see how it felt coming out of his mouth. So there's lots of ways that you can play with that.
For those couples that want to get more involved with both, I have really two questions with this. One is resources for things like erotic literature or audiobooks. Would you please share sort of where people could go? The other thing is, we're getting close to wrapping it up. So I want people to be able to get hold of you.
Sure.
If they want further information about what you do. And I'll definitely be posting your website and ways for people to get hold of you. But talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure. Booksontapes.com has a collection of erotica. I believe audible.com does too. The one thing that's worth knowing about erotica, whether it's book or whether it's recordings, nothing is going to work for everybody.
Right.
So my recommendation is to find an author you really like, and then explore some of their work, and to look for books of short stories, because if you don't like one story, you just skip to the next one. Novels are tricky because if you don't like it, you're sort of stuck. iBooks
has a lot of erotic literature.
Yeah, iBooks is another great option. It's the book manufacturers have realized that there's a big market here. So I think that's a great place to look. I've even found some really good stuff on audible.com, which means that you can order it from Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
I actually just took a quick look on audible.com. I searched for erotica, and they have almost 13,000 results.
Oh, wow.
So that's pretty impressive. It's the internet, so 90% of it at least is going to be pretty bad. But
do people have to worry with the internet and things like that in terms of, their IP addresses getting a problem with, viruses and hacking? And is there a way of avoiding those types of things?
Well, in terms of the files, if you purchase it from a company like Audible or iBooks, you know that it's being produced by a reputable company, as compared to just downloading something off of the internet.
Yeah, I would probably caution people not to just download stuff.
Yeah, I don't recommend it either, for exactly that reason.
So about you and how people can get hold of you and some of the things that you may be doing.
Sure. Well, I am based in Seattle. I'm a sex and relationship coach, and I also offer somatic sex education, so experiential somatic work. And I do a lot of sex and relationship coaching over Skype because lots of people all over the world need this kind of support. I have all the information about what I do at makesexeasy.com. You can also find my blog there, read a little bit about how I work. And if you are interested in finding me online, I'm on Facebook and Twitter and everywhere else as Charlie Glickman. So that's very easy. And that's the best way to keep up on where I am. I travel all over the US and sometimes Canada, teaching workshops, speaking at conferences. And when I'm in your town, I'm also available for in-person sessions.
That's terrific. Well, I want to just thank you for really giving of yourself, your time, and your willingness to just be really authentic and vulnerable. And people know who've been following me a bit how valuable I see that. More people who are willing to really get on that stage and just be who you are, the better the world's going to be.
Thank you.
And you really are someone like that. So I want to just thank you for coming on the show. I'm sure my listeners have benefited greatly. And thank you for giving of your time.
Oh, and thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure getting to talk with you today.
Alrighty. And I wish you all a good week, and stay tuned next week for another episode of the Couples Expert Podcast. Take care and stay connected. Bye-bye.